both sides were basically told, certainly the Germans were told, there can't be no surrender. You have to hold this hill at all costs. The commanders even offered incentives, like everybody will get an Iron Cross and 2 weeks off if you hold this hill. There was not a similar incentive given to the 2nd Ranger Battalion. It was more like, you guys are it.
An excerpt from today's guest, who's co-written an account of the World War II Army Ranger Battalion that formed the spearhead for the final push into Hitler's homeland. New York Times bestselling author Tom Clavin is here, and I'll speak with him right after this break. I'm Robert Child, and this is Point of the Spear. Gift-giving season is here, and for the military history lover on your list, check out my book about the Black Medal of Honor recipients of World War II. Immortal Valor chronicles these timeless heroes' life journeys through all the pain and struggle until their ultimate triumphs. I hope you purchase the book or audiobook, which is available now in stores and online. Welcome back. Before we get into the show, remember to click that follow button on the podcast to be notified of our future fantastic guests like the author we're speaking with today. And thank you. Today's guest has worked as a newspaper editor, magazine writer, TV and radio commentator, and a reporter for the New York Times. He has received awards from the Society of Professional Journalists, Marine Corps Heritage Foundation, and National Newspaper Association. His latest book, co-written with Bob Drury, is called The Last Hill, the epic story of a Ranger Battalion and the battle that defined World War II. And author Tom Clavin joins us now. Tom, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you for having me back. I appreciate it. Good to talk to you again.
Absolutely. I believe it's your third visit to the podcast.
I know you didn't learn your lesson the first 2 times, huh?
I know. I'll have to stop doing this. But you just put out such great books.
Good,
you're welcome. And before we get into the book, I want to ask about the initiative that General Truscott spearheaded, creating special operators based on British commandos.
General Lucian Truscott was one of the younger generals of the early World War II generation, and I think he was less reluctant than the older ones to try something new. And for the U.S. Army, a Ranger company or battalion was something new. Churchill really advocated for it on the English side, and the English were very aggressively putting together these special units, special forces. Now, we take that for granted now because of Army Rangers and Navy SEALs and some of the special forces that we have. But this was in the U.S. Army and U.S. Armed Forces in the late 30s and early 1940s. This was considered almost ungentlemanly. Finally, the early successes of Churchill's special forces, persuaded generals like Truscott to say, we need to do this also. We're going to be left behind in this war if we don't have the units like this. So he advocated for it, and fortunately, he was not he ended up not being a voice crying in the wilderness, because General George Marshall, who had a lot to say about what went on in the U.S. Army, he took up the cause too, and he had observers go over there and participate in some of the actions that were being done with the British special forces, and eventually he decided let's give it a try, and the very first Ranger Battalion was the one that's become known as Darby's Rangers.
Introduce us, though, to these Rangers, 2nd Battalion Rutter's Rangers, or the subject of the book.
They weren't Rutter's Rangers right away. They were the 2nd Battalion, and they were training in Tennessee. And there was one problem after another with the commanding officers. They went through a rotation of commanding officers, some because they didn't really seem to know what they were doing. They could have been good commanding officers of a traditional unit, but a special forces unit, they didn't quite know what to do with it. And but Colonel Rutter, James Earl Rutter from Eden, Texas, he had caught the eye of one of the top brass, and he liked the way that Rutter was tough but fair, and also a college man, and seemed progressive. And he said, let's try. I'm going to send Rutter in there. And Rutter arrived, I think it was around July 1st, 1943. And right away, he gathered the men around him and said, I'm going to make you men. I'm going to make you soldiers. I'm going to make you Rangers. And that began a process that went on for months and months of selecting, weeding out, training. The idea was a typical battalion would not be as small as between 400 and 500 men. It would be battalions that are larger, but he wanted a battalion that was sort of more lean and mean and could move fast. And what that also meant is that there weren't a lot of open spots. So if you didn't give your all a training and excel in everything you had to excel in, you were replaced. I mean, you were sent back to your old unit or you transferred to another unit. So Rudder was a fair man, but he also had to be kind of, maybe it's too strong a word, but kind of ruthless too, because he had to make sure that the people in his unit that were going to end up being sent overseas were the very best that they could be.
And they obviously engaged in battles in Europe. One of those was the Hurtgen Forest battle. Before we get into their actions in the battle, tell us a little bit about that battle and any actions they had before that battle.
The Hurtgen Forest is a reason why the book exists, The Last Hill, because my co-author, Bob Drury, while we were finishing up our previous book, had lunch with a retired Army colonel, and the subject of the Hurtgen Forest came up. Now, Bob, like many people, may have heard of the Hurtgen Forest campaign, but didn't really know anything about it. It's not like D-Day. It's not like the Battle of the Bulge. It's not like one of the Pacific campaigns, but not like Anzio or anything like that. And one reason for that is that the Hurtgen Forest was really a blood-soaked ground. It was a campaign that dragged on for months and months and months in the fall of 1944. Advances very slow by the Allies against Germany, and mistakes were made about how the campaign was conducted. And so Bob got really keen on doing a book on the Hurtgen Forest, but I was not keen on doing a book on the Hurtgen Forest as an entire campaign. I said, can we find a story that is within the Hurtgen Forest campaign? There is the overall story we could tell, but let's focus on one particular story that we could relate. And that's when we came across the 2nd Ranger Battalion. And I should mention the 2nd Ranger Battalion had received some attention before, not only during the war, but subsequently. There's a book by Doug Brinkley that was done involving the 2nd Ranger Battalion. But it always centered on D-Day, because on D-Day, the 2nd Ranger Battalion was tasked with disabling the guns at Point du Hoc on Normandy Beach. And it's like when that day was over, so was the story of the 2nd Ranger Battalion. And as we did some more research, we realized that the untold story is that what happened after that. One of the Brest campaign, for example, was a very important part of the taking occupied France back, but especially what we call Hill 400 and Castle Hill, it's sometimes referred to. And that was really the first hill inside Germany that the Allies needed to take for a number of reasons. And so as we did more research on that and found out how important and how desperate that battle was, you really had the elite of the Allied forces and the Rangers facing the elite of the German forces. We said, that's our story. We could tell the Hurtgen Forest story as backdrop, but we really want to focus on the 2nd Ranger Battalion and the officers and enlisted men that made up that battalion.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. Next time, Middle East diplomat and author Ethan Chorin joins us to discuss his new book, Benghazi, A New History of the Fiasco That Pushed America and Its World to the Brink.
Benghazi presents a paradox. There was 4 years of partisan warfare over this event. And yet, with all the noise, and I argue because of the noise, we never really got into the details of who was behind this, what really unequivocally happened there, where did it come from? As in, it didn't just come out of nowhere. There were antecedents, and I linked those antecedents both to 9/11 and to the rapprochement with Gaddafi.
Another reason to click that follow button to be notified when the episode releases. And before we return to the conversation, if you're enjoying the story of Special Forces in World War II, check out our earlier program, Marine Raiders, the true story of the legendary World War II battalions, with author Carol Engel Averett.
The World War II Raiders are just a remarkable group of special forces that were trained to go in and do really, your show is called The Point of the Spear, the Tip of the Spear, and that's really what they were. They would go in and do raids, quick, fast traveling very quickly. They were tremendous hand-to-hand combat warriors. They used their knives, stilettos, and had a lot of very special tactics that they used during the war.
It's show 143 from season 2, and you'll easily find it in our past episodes. Gift giving season is here, and for the military history lover on your list, check out my book about the Black Medal of Honor recipients of World War II. Immortal Valor chronicles these timeless heroes' life journeys through all the pain and struggle until their ultimate triumphs. I hope you purchase the book or audiobook, which is available now in stores and online. Now back to the conversation. The last hill, Hill 400, I was reading that the battalion was ordered to hold it to the last man, and the Germans were actually ordered to do the same thing. And that's what made it so brutal. What was the importance of that hill? Was it just getting over and breaking through into Germany? What was the importance of holding that hill?
For both sides, there was a strategic and psychological aspect to it. For the Germans, it was the first really significant hill observation point. There was a strategic importance to it inside Germany. So from a strategic point of view, the Germans wanted to hold that hill because from it they could their artillery observers could be more effective. They could shoot down at the Allied forces that kept trying to approach. And the emotional and psychological value of it. This was their invasion and penetration of the fatherland. And here's where they had to stop that invasion. They couldn't, the Allies could get no further. The other reason for the Germans is that they're so desperate to hold it is that from the top of Hill 400, if you looked, towards the German side of things, you could see that there were forces massing in the Ardennes forest, tanks and trucks and men and all kinds of machines and weapons and stuff that would eventually, as we would come to know, be the Battle of the Bulge, attack. So they were worried if we lose this hill, we might expose that position and our surprise factor is gone. From the Allied point of view, sort of like the same thing, there was a psychological aspect to taking and holding that hill because you were notifying Germany, this is the beginning of the end. We've now entered the fatherland and we're going to take the rest of it as soon as we can. And again, strategically, what can you see from that hill? You can first of all kick the Germans off of there, which makes our position safer. And second of all, what can you see up there that can help us, go even further in our campaign? So, like you said at the beginning, both sides were basically told. Certainly, the Germans were told there can't be no surrender. You have to hold this hill at all costs. The commanders even offered incentives, like everybody will get an Iron Cross and 2 weeks off, 2 weeks of liberty if you hold this hill. There was not a similar incentive given to the 1st and 2nd Ranger Battalion. It was more like, you guys are it. We've tried before and we can't. We haven't been able to take it, so it's up to the Rangers to do it.
It was no small hill. It was over 1,300 feet, right?
Yeah, it was not a little bump in the road,
No.
Which made it difficult and heavily and rather fortified with bunkers and machine gun nests and the German troops themselves. So it was not something where. And the other thing I should point out, which is very important, is that the weather was such at that point. We're talking about the first week in December when the attack on Hill 400 came by the 2nd Ranger Battalion, where the weather was routinely bad. There's a lot of cloud cover, sleet storms, rainstorms. You didn't have the luxury of saying, call in another airstrike. So you really didn't have that aspect of planes or small bombers that could even soften up the positions. You did have artillery strikes, which turned out to be very, very important for the Allied positions. I mean, the Germans had artillery strikes too, but the Rangers were attacking this hill without air support. Without
giving away too much of the book, because I want people to obviously go out and read it and buy it. What can you tell us about the aftermath of the battle, without giving away the end of the story?
It is in a way. I mean, the battle was the Rangers. Just alluding to something I said before, it was the Rangers who finally took the hill, but that was not the easy part, but that was just part of the job. The job was, okay, the Germans are going to want it back, so we have to, and so there were 5 counterattacks, and finally, the Germans just basically ran out of effectives. They just didn't have any more that could attack the hill, and just in time too, because the Ranger Battalion had been decimated by the counterattacks. What happened was the Rangers were finally relieved, and another unit was sent up there to hold the hill. And curiously, even though some of the observers on the Hill would file reports back to headquarters saying, we're seeing an unusual amount of activity off in the woods in the distance. Nobody followed up on it. Maybe because everybody's just so exhausted and the weather was terrible, whatever. So unfortunately, the Battle of the Bulge, which I believe began December 16, 1944, was able to get underway with it. It was a very strong surprise factor, which is unfortunate because it's possible that if somebody had been reading the intelligence more carefully, that attack might have been observed in advance.
Right. Now, Colonel Rudder had a pretty illustrious post-war career. Could you tell us about what he did after the war?
He did. I mean, Colonel Rudder got a good amount of it, deserved attention for leading the 2nd Rangers. He was wounded a couple of times himself. He was not somebody that led from the rear. And after the war was over, he went back home to Texas to his wife and his children. And he was in politics. He worked for private manufacturing. He was also in politics for a bit. He became mayor of the town that he lived in. But probably his most well-known position is, and he's, of course, stayed very involved in military affairs and reserves and things like that. He became a friend of Lyndon Johnson and later became president. They were good friends. But probably his most well-known post-war position was as the president of Texas A&M University. And as people read in the epilogue of the book, the Texas A&M University under his watch grew enormously. A number of students, his programs, and it's not unusual to. I mean, certainly on the campus itself, there are buildings, there are streets named after James Earl Rudder. And he became, certainly one of Texas' heroes. I mean, one of the legendary figures of World War II.
The book is called The Last Hill, the epic story of a Ranger Battalion in the battle that defined World War II. Tom, thanks so much for coming on the show once again.
Thank you, and I appreciate your questions. I love talking about the book.
That's it for this episode. Thanks so much for joining me. Next time, Middle East diplomat and author Ethan Chorin joins us to discuss his new book, Benghazi, A New History of the Fiasco That Pushed America and its World to the Brink.
Benghazi presents a paradox. There was 4 years of partisan warfare over this event. And yet, with all the noise, and I argue because of the noise, we never really got into the details of who was behind this, what really unequivocally happened there, where did it come from? As in, it didn't just come out of nowhere. There were antecedents, and I linked those antecedents both to 9/11 and to the rapprochement with Gaddafi.
Another reason to click that follow button to be notified when the episode releases. And if you like what you hear, leave a review or a rating or just click the follow button. And be sure to check out our Point of the Spear YouTube channel with bonus video material plus full military history documentaries. There's tons to explore, and I hope you check it out. I'm Robert Child, and this has been Point of the Spear.
Music licensed from audioblocks.com. Point of the Spear is produced by RSC Media Group.